There are many videos on YouTube critiquing TikTok and its relationship with fashion. And yeah, TikTokers generally spread a lot of terrible advice. Being fed so much fashion content as a TikTok user isn't great for your self-esteem. Who would have guessed seeing so many crazy outfits would make you feel insecure about your own outfits? There's so much wrong and terrible about TikTok and its relationship with fashion, but this video isn't going to be about that, because for a second there, before the pandemic took over our lives and TikTok blew up, it actually had something cool going for itself fashion-wise. Something positive that helped me and a lot of people learn and get into fashion. TikTok was pretty cool before it got taken over by the general public. Even though this led to the trend cycle accelerating, with micro trends dominating and everything being labeled a core, I'm not sure if that was entirely a bad thing either. I'm getting way ahead of myself though. We need to dive deeper.
What's the matter with you, huh? This is no time to go on a rag, Christopher.
I gotta take you back so we can look at how fashion TikTok progressed and highlight the good parts about it that are often not talked about at all. This is gonna be a lot of just my own opinion, so feel free to counter what I say if you disagree. I also have to give a huge shout out to Ryan Finn. While I was around on TikTok during this golden age and have made content on there since, I really started thinking about it after watching her video on the topic, discussing post-gatekeeping fashion discourse fatigue. Lol. Go watch her video, I highly recommend it. I might repeat some of the things she said so I can provide context, and because I agree with them, I want to share my point of view. Also, I'm sick, so please excuse the sniffles. Okay, time to dive deep. I mean, step back into our time machine. It's 2019. You're happier. TikTok is a relatively small app that a year before was merged with Musical.ly. You know, the app where kids and teenagers made dancing and lip syncing videos. That gave TikTok its first boost in users. But overall, it was a pretty underpopulated social media app. Most young people had heard of it, but were used to making fun of it because most people on there were making dancing and lip syncing videos. But other communities started growing as the app grew. Let's look at fashion TikTok's arc, just before the pandemic was in full swing. I remember joining TikTok in 2019, a time where I was already having a fashion enlightenment of sorts. At that time, there wasn't much purposefully made content. Most people weren't trying to become influencers or creators through the app. Videos were short, like less than a minute max. So most people used it for throwaway funny videos, memes, jokes, ideas, thoughts, mood boards. It was a bit of a wasteland, but I think that was TikTok's best period. Late 2019 to late 2020 before it got way too popular. On Instagram around the same time, fashion archive pages were quite popular. Won't lie, I had one. These were pages that mimicked Hidden.ny or Lil Jupiter that posted random fashion images that they found online. This format started manifesting on TikTok, but instead there would be videos of loads of obscure fashion images, flashing on the screen to drum and bass, hard techno, Aphex Twin, hyperpop, just any genre of music that was less common back then to younger generations. If you ever encountered fashion TikTok back then, you definitely must have seen these videos. People started making these videos just for fun, for themselves, of cool brands that they liked or just found online recently. It didn't feel like calculated pieces of content. It was people sharing their interests in less mainstream fashion, even if they didn't know that much about it, or if they did. These videos became the perfect pieces of fast-paced, short-form content that TikTok started to favor and push to users who showed interest in fashion content. Back then in 2019, fashion was just coming out of its streetwear era. High fashion was getting more popular among younger people, especially after Virgil joined Louis Vuitton. But these images being shared through these videos weren't easily accessible stuff, so they had such a mysterious appeal to them. When I was watching Ryan's video, she started playing them on screen, and I got goosebumps from nostalgia. Even if you recognized a couple things from these images, like Margiela tabbies, you probably didn't recognize most of what was being shown. And the images of the things you did know, like the tabbies, were featured in such interestingly shot photos, mostly archival photos. So many things started to grow out of this format. Most importantly was the spreading of these obscure fashion images, which seemed unique to a lot of people who had never encountered them before, which made them inherently cool. Also important to note was that these images were connected through a shared aesthetic or vibe. You had images from brands that most people didn't know yet, like Kiko Kostadinov or Helio Emile, to vintage pieces from Helmut Lang, Miu Miu, and Margiela, even to defunct Japanese brands like 2047, 1120, and Beauty Beast. It was this huge variety of stuff mixed together, as well as abstract forms of photography and archival fashion footage. There was all sorts of subversive imagery. I know my reaction when I saw all this stuff. What is it? Where is it from? How can I find this? What music is this even? Think how impactful these videos were, even to people that did know some stuff about fashion. The vibes that these videos presented were enchanting, and one word became a bit of a buzzword regarding these videos that shared a moodier, vintage aesthetic. Archive. In my opinion, the first widely adopted TikTok-inspired core, even if it doesn't have core in the name. There were cores and names for certain aesthetics before TikTok, of course. Gorpcore, for example, was coined in 2017, but the term did later get massively popular because of TikTok. Archive fashion also existed before TikTok, specifically referring to a designer's greatest hits. It had had its moment in social media as well on Tumblr in the 2010s, because a lot of these archival images were obviously around then as well. But TikTok's archival fashion took on a bit of a different meaning. Archival clothing is technically any piece of clothing taken from a designer's past body of work, but it became the word used to describe this vibe and aesthetic that these videos presented of moody, dark, experimental characters and clothing. And why did this term get so widely adopted? Because these videos never provided any context, just a mash of images and music. It was just a feeling that was being conveyed. It was the most profound thing you could show thousands of impressionable young people interested in fashion. So me and many others went looking. In order to find these things on online marketplaces and other social media platforms like Pinterest or Instagram, search terms were created. In Archive Fashion's case, the search term was appropriated. If you look up Archive Fashion now, a lot of the results you get are from newer brands like Helio O'Meal or Post Archive Fashion, as well as actual archival stuff like Junya Watanabe and Raf Simons. Most of the images that were actually vintage from the 90s and early 2000s on Pinterest came from Tumblr originally if you clicked into them, but often they wouldn't provide much context either. You might just get a brand name if you're lucky. So through these videos, Archive Fashion got extremely popular, and with this we saw a surge of interest in brands and items that fit the aesthetic. Margiela tabbies were trending on TikTok in 2021. Subversive Basics got really big in women's fashion, while in men's fashion, Rick Owens became a TikTok brand for a bit. I think it's highly probable that without TikTok and the rise of Archive Fashion, Playboi Carti probably wouldn't have based his whole fashion persona around Rick Owens. I think he was heavily exposed to it when he was popular, so he rode the trend and made it his own. Just to clarify, I'm not trying to say that Rick Owens and other brands that I talk about weren't popular before this, but in 2020 to 2021, these brands and this aesthetic started to get really popular because of TikTok, which then spread to Instagram. Archive Fashion basically became a trend, and here's what that really means. There were early adopters that started dressing in a certain way. A lot of people started noticing it, and since these people don't see it everywhere yet, just on the early adopters, they go to replicate it thinking it's the coolest thing ever because it's new to them. Inevitably though, it gets saturated. It's everywhere. People no longer want to be associated with it, even the people who wore it first before it was a trend, and it eventually goes back to the same level of popularity that it was at before. That's the trend cycle basically. And at the end of a trend's popularity in niche fashion communities, that's when things start getting popular in the mainstream, and we start seeing it be replicated in fast fashion, and that's reflected in Google Trends for Archive Fashion or Rick Owens. They're mostly popular right now, rather than when it felt like the most popular content about these things were being made in 2020. Remember recently Shein actually ripped off Rick Owens? Anybody have a spare pair of those? In fashion, people always try to one up each other and be a part of the cool period of a trend before it's massively popular. Or people just want to do their own thing anyway. So naturally on TikTok, things diversified and more people started highlighting other brands, more recent but still obscure fashion, and making even niche mood board videos, which is fine. Fashion is constantly changing. That's how it works. Except now it was happening on TikTok, a social media platform like no other, with an algorithm and format that makes things spread like wildfire. So you can imagine as things started diversifying and more people started coming to the app, interest in all sorts of different styles of fashion grew exponentially. Archive Fashion felt like it was popular for quite a while, like a year and a half or so. Then we got Y2K Fashion, which also lasted a bit, but not as long as Archive. But then there was Gorpcore that didn't really last that long, then Cottagecore, indie sleaze, then blokecore. At first, all these styles became cores because people weren't able to remember all the brands that these aesthetics were attached to. So to keep up and make things easier, these styles had to be labeled, as well as make them easier to find in search engines. And with the growth of fashion TikTok came different styles of content. Get Ready With Me's, outfit montages from people like Wisdom. Now there were also people educating others about the history of brands, the fashion landscape today, and how to style these new styles. Thrift shopping got really popular, and so did using proxy services to buy stuff from Japan. TikTok became a place of infinite information, where gatekeeping became extinct and you were shunned for doing it. I remember this huge surge of fashion content creators all at once. At first, fashion TikTok was like a niche part of TikTok, sharing obscure fashion stuff. Then it blew up into a whole micro industry, with all the different things that you could do on there and all the styles coming out of it. And even when it was blowing up, it was still nice. So to get back to what I said at the start of this video, before TikTok really blew up over the pandemic, it was a pretty cool place to discover new types of fashion. High fashion has been historically inaccessible in terms of actually acquiring it, but also learning about it and seeing it. Fashion is a constant fight between brands to capture the spotlight and get eyes on them. So a lot of the time, the smaller brands, or just the brands that aren't interested in playing the marketing game, can be difficult to find, even if they're the most interesting of them all. I think joining TikTok at that time and consuming all that content is definitely a core memory for me, being exposed to how interesting fashion could be, which inspired me to start making my own clothes and start to pursue it. For that, I have to say, thanks, TikTok. But that was in a period of learning where I wanted to absorb as much information as possible. So what TikTok provided was invaluable. Now in fashion, I don't want to be exposed to so many things at once. Not that I want to stop learning, but I want to spend more time learning what I already know instead of finding new things. And yeah, that's nice. It was all fine and dandy when fashion was a tiny part of TikTok compared to the vast influence that fashion TikTok has today. So what about after everything started speeding up? Well, for a time it was still cool when people started talking about this stuff more and there was more types of content. But once there were too many creators and users, the quality of content went down for sure. And so many people have pointed out the downfalls of fashion TikTok since. But I think that early TikTok shaped a lot of people's ideas around fashion. fashion, in the same way that current or recent TikTok has shaped the landscape of fashion with the rise and fall of cores. So as I said, everything sped up. Many styles started popping and being labeled. Celebrities started jumping in on micro trends. They started being commodified by companies. Later came brands that hopped on the hypes like Heaven by Marc Jacobs. The prices of stuff went up everywhere, from Depop to Yahoo JP Auction to actual thrift stores, which have been ransacked and just kind of suck now, to be honest. I blame TikTok for that. And there was just barely any longevity in any of these styles. And there was a lot of discourse about everything happening on fashion TikTok. It all started in a fun way. People were stuck at home and were exploring fashion, learning about old brands and styles. But they started becoming just really superficial jokes. Buying Arc'teryx to use it in the shower was, it was funny once. And then Blokecore was just not at all. It had so many people who called football soccer, buying soccer jerseys, dressing up as soccer fans. It came to a point where most of the authentic fun and learning was kind of over. And the platform became so oversaturated and superficial that I think a lot of people just wanted to stop participating altogether. Don't get me wrong, there was still some fun fashion content. In retrospect, Luke Blovad feels like a reaction to what fashion TikTok had become. And he's done pretty well for himself. There are still great creators on there, don't get me wrong, being their authentic selves and not spreading crap, just giving their opinions and having fun. But once I stopped making TikToks and moved to YouTube, I haven't really been back since. I think that people should always be learning, but not at the pace that TikTok encouraged. I've been exposed to so many things through it that now my goal in learning about fashion is to take a step back and dive deeper into what I already know instead of looking for the next thing. That's one reason I started making the videos on YouTube that I have been, diving into brands. I feel like TikTok never taught me how to actually think about these things. When the flashy videos were a popular format, being a young, impressionable person, I just assumed it was cool from how exclusive and new it was to me. For me, TikTok was an introduction, and I hope that it still can be for people getting into fashion, but I think it's just a lot harder to find that content now. But you have to wade through so much crap, and it's hard to know who to even believe. Back at the start, there wasn't that as much, and you just kind of had to figure stuff out for yourself, which I think is one of the best ways to learn. You have to spend more time finding out what's true and what's not, and actually looking for things, and it gets you more invested than being fed information straight from a video from a random person you've never met, like me. Now I think it's cool to not engage in online fashion discourse as much, or fast-paced fashion content in general. It's also good to step away to not make yourself constantly feel bad about your wardrobe. The rise of fashion TikTok was with young people craving identity. I think Ryan had a great point in predicting a stronger rise of interest in more contemporary independent designers like Kiko Kostadanov and Blumarine that has already been happening. These are relatively new brands that you don't need to put a huge amount of effort into learning because they're still young and relatively unknown to a wider fashion audience. So especially during the time on TikTok where everything was trending and everyone was being called a poser, it's hard to be a fake fan of a brand like Kiko because just knowing that it exists and wearing it is cool. Given that you actually do like it, of course. Don't just go buying it straight away now after I said that. But there's a relatively low barrier to entry. You just got to know about it and have the taste for it. And there are a lot of brands like that. As fun as it is to look at the past and be inspired by what fashion was like back then, I think it's more exciting and important to participate in what's happening now around you by these contemporary brands. I also think because of the exposure to so many different styles and aesthetics, people have a better idea of what they like now, opposed to jumping from trend to trend every few months trying to figure it out. Different styles were injected into your veins so fast that you didn't have to participate in everything, but you still got to see what elements that you liked. For me personally, I didn't really participate in any TikTok trends directly at first, but I took the parts that I liked and have been slowly mixing and matching stuff into my own style. So I think in that sense, micro trends have definitely improved a lot of people's taste and introduced people to a lot of new things. Overall, I don't think TikTok has been as good as it's been bad for fashion as a whole. I'm not trying to say that because of all the stuff that I mentioned, that it's overall had a positive impact or something. I don't think it has. It's more on a person-to-person basis with your own experience, how good it's been. I think generally I had a pretty enjoyable time on it, and when it wasn't good for me anymore, I left. I just wanted to point out that it hasn't been all bad as a lot of people are making it out to be. For a lot of people who were there very early, like I said, it was a very impactful platform like no other. I think the trend cycle will probably slow down again, to be honest, but I feel like a lot less people are also less interested in following trends, as they know what they like now more, and they saw how unsustainable it is to keep up with them, both environmentally and just mentally. If you want to get a little more insight into some niche brands that early TikToks were making mood boards out of, in my recent Patreon video, I share my opinions and give some insight into a few of these niche Japanese brands like 2047, 1112, Beauty Beast, Hysteric Glamour, Photos, if you're interested to learn about that. Again, check out Ryan's video as well. It goes much deeper than this video did. It's definitely worth listening to. Yeah, final message. This is all just an opinion. Don't take it too seriously, but delete TikTok. That's what the cool kids are doing. Bye.